Howdy folks, welcome to another Besides and On podcast. Slightly different today, we're on Zoom. Craig has had a bit of an injury, so he's stuck in his room, unfortunately.
Aye, I'm housebound now. Well, room bound.
Aye, well, usually I like to ask how are we doing, Craig? So, genuinely, how are you doing this time?
I still can't walk, but I could limp to my chair from my bed, which is right there. So it's fine. It's fine. I can make that distance.
So, on the line this week, we have John Mortimer from Abolish Holyrood, or to give them the full name, Abolish the Scottish Parliament Party. Is that right? That's all correct, isn't it, John?
That's right, yeah.
Perfect. So again, how are you doing, John? How's your week been?
I'm well, thanks. Yeah, I've been quite busy just with doing a lot of the online campaign and all the admin that's involved with it, because I'm the election agent for each of the 8 regions. So it was quite a lot of admin and exchanging emails and phone calls and all that kind of boring stuff. But we've also got the campaigning side of things as well. So yeah, keeping busy.
So John, have you been getting much feedback on your policies and stuff like that recently? Is it been okay?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of engagement on social media. We've got our own Facebook page where, every day if I put up graphics, they'll tend to get, a few hundred likes and shares. They'll reach several thousand people. So that's been a really useful way to kind of engage with the electorate, during these circumstances. But physical campaigning hasn't really been allowed until basically the last week or so. So we get good engagement online. We get a lot of people getting in touch with us. A lot of people tell us that either they voted against devolution in the original referendum back in 1997, and they're glad that they've got another opportunity to do that. But there's also people contacting us saying that they voted for it back in 1997, but now they're going to be voting abolish because they were promised one thing with Holyrood, but they got something else. They believed New Labour, when it was George Robertson said devolution will kill nationalism stone dead. That's a direct quote from him. But obviously it's had the opposite effect. It's kind of brought us into the era of SNP government, 14 years of it now, the never-ending, constant constitutional obsession. So a lot of people who voted for devolution, believing that it would kind of placate the SNP, realise now that this route of appeasement doesn't work. So I had a lot of really positive feedback from people. And as I tell people, what we're doing at this election is really unique. We're actually giving people the first chance to vote against devolution since Blair's 1997 referendum. So it's generated a lot of really good feedback.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Well, what we usually start off on is we like to go back to sort of the beginning. So what was your childhood like, John? Did you grow up around about here?
Well, I live in Glasgow currently. I grew up in Dumbarton and I lived there until a few years ago. I went to Nopson Primary. Don't have anything of particular note really to say about my childhood. It was a fairly standard childhood.
Oh.
I went on to study at Glasgow University. I studied history and politics, and I graduated in 2011. Never worked in politics or anything like that, but I obviously have been doing this stuff with Abolish in the last couple of years.
So, do you remember at all, what sort of sparked you to get into politics? Was there anything like a small thing that happened that you remember that sparked that original idea for you to get into politics or anything like that?
Well, I think when I was looking at things to study at university, I was more orientated towards history, and I did it was a joint degree I did. It was history and politics. I was probably more interested in the history side of things, but I thought that politics might be a bit more practical, perhaps, in terms of getting work afterwards. Turned out to be a bit of a misplaced hope, but I thought that this would be good to do a joint degree, and that's what got me into the politics side of things. In terms of what got me involved, outside of an academic setting, it was really the initial referendum back in 2014.
Okay.
I got involved with Better Together, just as an ordinary activist who was doing work with small teams going around leafleting the Dumbarton and the local areas when I was living there. And that's what got me involved in politics. And over time, I came to kind of develop the views that I have now, and in particular, this criticism of devolution, and just this sense that the whole setup that we have at the minute is just completely untenable from a kind of unionist perspective.
Right. Okay. You got anything to add?
So I was looking around, and it's quite hard to find information on support or being against devolution. Have you got anything on your side that sort of shows what you should be expecting at the polls?
Yeah, well, I mean, the major pollsters don't tend to include us in the polls. They certainly don't prompt us as one of the options. It's the same really for any parties outside the kind of big five, maybe the Alba Party. But we often refer to a major poll conducted by Panel Base in Sunday 19 on behalf of the Sunday Times. And that showed that support for abolishing Holyrood in Scotland was in 2019 22%. When you break it down by party, for example, a majority of Scottish Conservative voters, 57%, support scrapping the Scottish Parliament. So just for context on that 22% figure, when you're contesting a Scottish parliamentary election on the regional lists, which is what we're doing, because it's proportional representation, you will elect an MSP with between 5.5 and 6% of the vote in any given region. So, as I tell people, we only need 1 in every 4 of those who actually want to scrap the Scottish Parliament to lend us their regional vote, their second vote. And we would elect an MSP in each of the 8 regions and be able to provide, an anti-devolution voice and build the momentum, in the future towards, eventually abolition.
So with that number of 22%, does that not suggest a drop in support for abolishing Parliament? Sorry, I've got banging outside. I don't know if you could hear that, but it's doing my nothing. So apologies for that.
That's no bother. It's quite faint, so that's no bother at all.
Right, okay.
It shows that support's not really changed. Well, overall, if you were to go back to Blair's referendum, it's not really a massive change, but it's risen very significantly compared to what it was a number of years before that, when it was quite a fringe position. It would be sitting around like the 10% mark. It's risen quite a lot recently, as I said, up to 22% in 2019, and I think that's because of the fact of having this 14 years now of kind of SNP misrule from Holyrood. Scotland becoming almost feeling like a one-party state in some ways, through devolution. And what's been really interesting as well is just over the last 12 months, how much this kind of devo sceptic position has begun to enter the mainstream in a way that it never did before. I think a lot of it goes back to Boris Johnson's leaked comment about devolution being a disaster. And it was interesting that it was something that was leaked. It was something he felt that he couldn't say in public. Obviously, going against his own party's pro-devolution policy, but in private, he could see that it was a disaster. And since then, you've had Andrew Neil saying Scotland's become a banana republic without bananas. You've had mainstream commentators like Fraser Nelson, The Spectator, Brian Monteith, The Scotsman, Henry Hill at Conservative Home, all taking either kind of soft devo sceptic positions or else being outright anti-devolution. So it's really entered mainstream discourse in the last 12 months in a way that it never had before. So that's building on that 22% base that was there in that major poll in 2019. And although people might say, well, 22% is a minority, yes, but it's a sizable minority. And if you look at the independence polling, when they launched the independence referendum back in 2012, it was only polling around 27%. So, and they built that up obviously to 45%, which they got in the actual referendum itself. So we have a very good base to work with this. And if you look at Holyrood and how unrepresentative it is of the diversity of Scottish opinion on devolution, there's 129 MSPs at Holyrood. Every single one is either pro-devolution or pro-more devolution than what we currently have. And in fact, most are pro-more devolution than what we currently have. But if Holyrood actually reflected Scottish public opinion, going back to that panel-based poll, 22%, you would expect about 30 of those 129 MSPs to be putting forward an anti-devolution or a devo-sceptic point of view. But we're not. We don't have that. We don't have that voice. We just have this stifling pro-devolution consensus.
Yeah, I would say, to be fair, people that are against devolution kind of don't really have a choice of party to vote for. I mean, their only choice really until your party came along was UKIP, and UKIP just aren't very popular in general. So they've not really had anybody to vote for. So not I say this in a lot of podcasts, but I'm not to show favouritism for anybody, but I would imagine that in the same way that Alliance for Unity and ALBA are going to appeal to people that are trying to maximise their side of the vote, I would imagine that your party would do the same thing, because it's not like it doesn't take specific ideas in certain ways the same way UKIP does. It's sort of just there for that specific purpose of abolishing Holyrood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we're very much like a single issue anti-devolution party. The thing with UKIP, I mean, it's really a kind of defunct brand, and they've actually flip-flopped a lot with devolution. It was not long ago that UKIP were calling for an English Parliament and for a federal UK. They're polling in recent, they've fought several local by-elections where they've been polling under 1%. So unfortunately, they're just not really credible as a kind of anti-devolution option. And then the thing is, as well, is because they're not just a single issue anti-devolution party, they've got a lot of baggage from their other issues that they've been involved with over the years, and the other kind of personalities that have been involved with them. So Abolish doesn't have any of that. We're very much a single issue party for anybody who is anti-devolution. I would point out as well, it's often characterised as being some kind of like right-wing point of view, but there's nothing inherently right or left-wing about wanting to scrap devolution. And one of the most outspoken original devo skeptics was Tam Dalyell, obviously the Labour MP. So it's across political spectrum kind of issue, because it's just a single issue on a constitutional point. And I think there's reason to believe we'll do well. As I said, there's no one representing that point of view in Scottish politics. Abolish is going to be there, top of every single regional list ballot paper in Scotland, with this striking message and very good branding. I mean, if you compare, even just looking at the ballot paper optics, Alex Salmond completely mucked up his registration with the Electoral Commission, so he doesn't even have a logo on the ballot paper. Whereas Abolish, you're very striking there at the top, this big Union flag emblem. So we're certainly going to, even though the media has just given us blackout essentially, we are going to get noticed because we knew that we would have to rely on the ballot paper itself to reach people. In fact, just on that point about the media blackout, it's extraordinary that you could have a situation where you have a national election and there's a party that's contesting every single region. Every single person in Scotland can vote for Abolish at this election because we've got candidates all across the country, and we have not got a mention on ITV, not on the BBC, nothing. I mean, and that's absolutely extraordinary.
Have they even sent messages to you? Have they tried to get in touch with you or anything like that, or at all?
We've had a bit of a back and forth with them. I don't necessarily want. I'm not sure on the whole legal thing of going into specifics of what's been said and whatnot, so I'll not go into that. But we have been in touch with them and we have been trying to resolve this. But it's just an example of the kind of behind the scenes things that ends up taking up a lot of your time when you're running something like this. It's like you don't get to spend all the time on the campaign trail. A lot of it is spent doing this behind the scenes stuff and the admin and all that kind of stuff. But
I feel like they kind of send some people jumping through hoops in some sense, like some of the sort of the bigger politics shows will get in touch really quickly, and then they'll sort of palm you off on the smaller politics shows and stuff like that, and then just sort of keep you doing that for a lot of the time. So a lot of your time spent just trying to get on politics on Radio 4 or something like that, for a 10-minute slot or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. It's just constant back and forth, constant chasing people up, arguing with people when the whole just to get some basic coverage. But we have had coverage in we've had articles about us in the Daily Record. Were covered recently in the Times following a phone interview I did with one of the journalists. So we've been picked up by a few different papers. Henry Hill mentioned us, did quite a good piece talking about, following on for a piece he did about the Abolish the Welsh Assembly Party and the Spectator. So we have had some coverage, but I think it's really wrong that the kind of establishment media has just given us this blackout when we have candidates across the whole country. It's quite extraordinary, really. But in a way, that's also because we are a threat to them in their positions. I mean, they have all these reporters that are based at Holyrood, whose careers are about reporting devolved politics. So obviously, wanting to scrap that whole infrastructure, we are obviously a threat to them. So that plays into it as well. But because we've got the good social media content, we're reaching thousands of people every day through that. And we're doing everything we can to get the message across. And, we're the first thing that everyone's going to see right at the top of the regionalist ballot paper with this kind of strike and branding. So we always accounted for the media marginalising us.
You're a graphic designer by trade, right?
Yeah, it's something it's something I've ended up doing, and it's not something that I studied. As I said, my background's history and politics. So I'm basically self-taught, and I've ended up being able to get like a number of contracts just through a kind of network of contacts that I have through kind of small organisations and campaign groups, etc. So yeah, that's basically why I've been able to do this kind of professional content for Abolish.
That must be really helpful, because I've been in a number of small parties and we've always sort of relied on someone helping us out. And it must be nice to just be like, okay, this is my idea, I'm just going to make it, and then that's it. And you can make infographics and you can make leaflets and things like that. And you can just churn them out quite easily.
Yeah, it's a massive help. I think people sometimes, if they get into politics and in particular party politics, they maybe have this nice idea that they're going to be part of this like big team where everyone's got their different role and everyone will, and so will take care of this and somebody else will take care of that and it'll all be run very efficiently. And in reality, you often end up just basically doing a lot of it yourself. Like I've had to get really fly for dealing with the Electoral Commission, for dealing with the media, press releases, all the admin of, so being an election agent myself for all of our candidates in all of the regions, doing the graphic design work, doing the print content, the leaflets and stuff we've had produced. It's a lot of work to it. And it's been very useful to have those graphic design skills. And even for things like the website, which I put up and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's been really useful.
Oh, did you make the website as well?
Yeah. I mean, look, we're not one of these parties where we've, often small parties, it'll maybe be like a retired businessman who's got spare time and spare money, and he'll just, go to these, big professional companies that will charge him extortionate rates to do fairly basic stuff. No, we just really have to learn how to do everything ourselves. And it's good that I've got a small team around me. I should also be clear, I don't want to make it sound like I'm doing everything myself, because I'm not. We've got a really good kind of small core team that's doing a lot of hard work. And they're working really hard over the past few months to bring this together. I think what we've done is pretty exceptional, considering we don't have the money or the profile even of other small parties that you mentioned, like Alliance for Unity. We don't have George Galloway's money or profile or anything like that. We've had to work really hard to put this together, and I think we've pulled off something quite pretty impressive under the circumstances, to cover all of Scotland as a new party, to have candidates there right across the country, and to win as well the battle for becoming top of the ballot paper, because I know we'll have wound Alex Salmond up. He'll have been angling for a repeat of what he did in 2007, where the SNP, I don't know if you remember, in 2007 when they actually got in at Holyrood, they, rather than standing under their name on the regionalist ballot paper, stood under the description Alex Salmond for First Minister. So it would go at the top, and he will have been planning to replicate that with Alba Party, and he will have wanted his Saltire logo that you've maybe noticed him using to be top of every ballot paper in Scotland. So in the end, he's been very unceremoniously booted off by Abolish. He's now booted off top spot, and he doesn't have a logo because he messed up his registration with the Electoral Commission. Just on that point, actually, sorry if I'm going off on a tangent here, but just talking about the kind of, how I was mentioning doing a lot of things myself, and how these other parties will, pay goodness knows how much to professionals to take care of stuff for them. It's extraordinary how incompetent the major parties have been at sorting out such a basic thing as what appears on the ballot paper. I mean, about half the parties on the list have in some way mucked up their ballot paper, their registration of the Electoral Commission, so they've not got the right stuff on the ballot paper. I mean, the Scottish Conservatives wanted to use the description "End Division, No Referendum, Rebuild Scotland" on the ballot paper.
And instead of a logo?
Sorry?
Instead of a logo?
No, the way it works on the regional list ballot paper is you have the party name,
right,
and then you can also have a party emblem and also a 6-word description.
Okay.
But the description has got to include a reference to the party name. The reason for that is that the description can be used instead of the party name on the constituencies.
Okay.
So the Conservatives applied for the description "No Referendum, End Division, Rebuild Scotland." Of course, that was rejected because it doesn't include a reference to the party name. So they now don't have a description on the ballot paper. That's a part of UK government with all their paid staff, all their specialists to sort this stuff out. Can't even sort that out. Labour Party wanted to use a couple of descriptions. They had one along the lines of, I think it was like Anis Sarwar, Labour's National Recovery Plan, and it had another kind of similar equivalent. They put both into the Electoral Commission well after the deadline, and so they weren't accepted. They went through a big legal challenge with the Electoral Commission, and I believe they lost and had to pay the Electoral Commission's legal fees. So Labour also don't have description on the ballot paper.
Jesus.
Alba Party completely mucked up all their descriptions and their logo. The descriptions didn't include, again, any reference to the party name. I don't know what exactly happened with the logo, but I do know that the Electoral Commission has a rule against using logos that mimic an X mark. And so Alba's Saltire logo probably fell foul of that. But I mean, they should have read the rules. They should have known this stuff. You know, you look at it, some of the former First Minister of Scotland, with all the money and resources and contacts he has, can't sort that out. Other small parties with problems as well. I know George Galloway's All for Unity. They wanted to have his name on the ballot paper, but of course can't do that because he's not the candidate in all regions. So many parties have just completely mucked that up. And if you look at the ballot paper, about half the parties, including a lot of the major ones, don't have a description because they just completely mucked up. So Abolish, we get everything right because I just dealt with everything with the Electoral Commission myself. I know the rules inside out with them. So we've got really amazing branding. This is at the top of every ballot paper. Abolish the Scottish Parliament Party with a big union flag. Actually, they save 100 million yearly. So yeah, and it just shows you these parties with all their money, all their profile, all their experts, they can't even sort out the basics. It's pathetic, really. You know, that's just and then we wonder why they don't do a very good job at running the country.
Do you think it's ego that they're already there, so they didn't need to worry about it? The Electoral Commission is going to bend over backwards to accommodate them, and it just turns out it's not true.
I think there's definitely an element of that because Labour, to use their example, they put in their stuff well after the deadline, and then they launched this legal challenge that was reported in the papers, despite the fact that they were clearly in the wrong. It was their own fault for putting it in well after the deadline, and so they lost their case. So yeah, I think the ego is a part of it. Interestingly, there was the SNP put in a couple of descriptions for use in the ballot paper along the lines of, I think it was like SNP, but both votes SNP for Indiref 2 or something to that effect they were going to use in the ballot paper. And it was actually reported in the media that they had filed to use these descriptions at the election, and the SNP put those in miles after the deadline. Like it was literally like it was very close before the actual nomination papers started to go in. And remarkably, the SNP's ones were approved. They were approved despite, and not only that, they were approved despite being put in much later than those of several other parties, smaller parties that weren't approved. Because there were other parties that went in a little bit after the deadline, didn't get approved. The SNPs went in well after the deadline and did get approved. So I think they probably have had enough clout just to, bully or whatever the Electoral Commission into accepting them. Although, funnily enough, in the end, the SNP didn't actually use those descriptions on the ballot paper. They used one that they've had registered for years, the Nicola Sturgeon for First Minister.
So that could just be a total see what I could do. You can't do that, but I can because I'm the boss.
Yeah, I don't really know what their thinking was. I think they probably applied for those in response to Alex Salmond launching the Alba Party, and they felt that there was a threat to their kind of hardcore, pro-Indy Ref 2 vote. However, they've probably monitored the polls and have saw that Alex Salmond's not been doing too well in them, and they maybe feel that they risk alienating their softer vote if they start being too overt and making the election about a second referendum. But that's an interesting fact in itself, that the SNP haven't registered these descriptions for use in the ballot paper about a second referendum, aren't using them because they probably feel that they would damage them at the polls. So that tells you a lot about the appetite for a second referendum in Scotland, that it's not there.
So this is the first time this has came up so often in election campaigns. But I've had to ask this question in slightly different ways to 3 or 4 different parties now, maybe 5 actually. Are you worried that you're going to end up splitting the vote of unionists?
Well, we are only contesting the regional list, which is proportional representation, so that avoids splitting the vote. And in fact, what it does is it can help maximise the unionist vote, because if the larger unionist parties do win constituency seats through this tactical voting campaign, for every constituency seat a party wins within a region, they lose 1 seat of what they win on the regional lists. It's a very confusing and convoluted system, and you're essentially casting your first vote and your second vote with no knowledge of how the one will affect the other, because you don't know how votes are going to fall on the day. But it's proportional representation. We're not contesting any constituencies. We're only contesting the regional lists. So we know that all votes that we win on the regional list count, because we won't get penalised for having 1 constituency seats. Something else I would say as well is, when this issue comes up, is people have got this idea that unionist votes can just be kind of shuffled freely between party, but that's not the case. A lot of Labour voters are voting Labour not on a unionist ticket, but on their social policies or whatever. Same with the Lib Dems. Even it's the same with a minority of the Conservative voters. They're kind of small government, rural Tories. I mean, if you go up to the North East in Scotland, it's well known that Conservative voters there will tactically vote on an anti-Labour basis, and they'll swing between the SNP and the Tories because they regard those parties as being more friendly to rural affairs than Labour. So this idea that unionist votes can just be shuffled between Labour and Conservative and Lib Dem is a bit problematic. But another thing that Abolish is doing, I think that other small unionist parties aren't, is that we're actually bringing protest votes that are just completely outside of unionist and nationalist politics, into the unionist camp. So yeah, Abolish will have this core unionist support, but we're also going to get a lot of protest voters that are just angry at politicians. I mean, we get a lot of people messages who say, yeah, I hate Holyrood, but I also hate Westminster, hate the Lords, the Commons and all the waste there. They hate the EU, they just hate everything. They hate all politicians. And it's not about unionism or nationalism. For a lot of people, it's just going to be a protest vote. So we're actually doing something like, for example, Alliance for Unity, which is all about shuffling votes, existing unionist votes between unionist parties without really bringing anything new into it. What Abolish is doing is actually bringing this whole protest vote element into the unionist camp and onto a unionist ticket. So I think we're doing something very useful in that sense of this election.
This is a weird question, so bear with me. Is there a possibility that you could be appealing to, like you said, the sort of fuck every politician type people? Could you theoretically be exciting to anarchist types because you're trying to get rid of a government institution?
I don't really know what an anarchist take on Abolish would be. I can see how it might feed into that spirit a little bit, just kind of saying it's certainly one way to let the politicians at Holyrood know how you feel about them, just abolish, scrap the law kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, from the beginning, I knew that an important part of our electoral strategy would be that it's not all just about shuffling existing unionist votes between, unionist parties. It's actually about reaching out to other elements of the electorate that are perhaps feeling unrepresented at the minute. And I think an important point as well that a lot of people don't realise with politics is that the average person that is not really heavily politically engaged tends to vote out of like very vague sentiments rather than any attachment to like a particular issue or set of policies. Like, so a lot of people that vote SNP aren't, diehard Scottish nationalists. They're also not necessarily, like centre-left social democrats. There's a lot of people that are voting SNP that are voting for them because they see them as being a protest vote. Less so now than was the case in the past, but there is still a large area. I mean, if there's opinion polls that have showed that about a third of SNP voters are pro-Brexit, that they want reduced immigration. And I know that's especially true of the kind of more traditional wing within the SNP. Their support base, especially if you get up north in their kind of old heartland, it's more it's like the kind of tartan Tory stereotype. It's almost like the same sentiments as UKIP, but with this kind of Scottish nationalist kind of dressing over it. So there's a lot of SNP voters are protest voters, and the way to win them over to unionism is not necessarily by having this kind of like soft, centrist, middle ground, mushy kind of Ruth Davidson type unionism. It's actually by offering a protest alternative that's like more of a protest vote than the SNP. So I'll tell you a funny story. I mean, I was involved in a local by-election in Fortisset ward. It's like Harthill and Shotts. This was back in 2017. It was with a small unionist party I was involved with then called the Better Britain Unionist Party. And I was at the count. And on the local elections, you can actually see the ballots come up. It's like flashed up on an electronic screen as we're counting them. And a lot of a good number at that election were people who had done a Better Britain Unionist Party, which had a union flag emblem similar to Abolish. They were doing that as their first vote, and their second vote was SNP. And the Tory candidate was standing not far along from me, and I overheard her saying something along the lines of, I can't understand that. Why is that happening? But I did understand why it was happening. It was because, people vote. People have very kind of compartmentalised, eclectic understandings of politics, and as I said, they're often voting out of vague sentiments rather than attachment to policy. So that made total sense to me. They probably just see a Better Britain Unionist Party and SNP as being, in some sense, anti-establishment options. It just reminds me of a story someone else told me about back in the days when UK politics was the Labour Party, the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. This was, prior to the Liberal Party merging with the SDP to become the Liberal Democrats. And the Liberal Party back then was very much, very pro-Europe, very progressive, very pro-immigration, all this kind of stuff. But they're also very much like the kind of third party, the kind of smaller. It was sort of like a 2.5-party system. Like the Labour and Tories were very much dominant, and Liberals were kind of like the outsiders. And I remember this person telling me that he'd on the campaign trail and he'd be speaking to a lot of people who were angry protest voters, who were anti-immigration, who were anti-Europe, who were anti the whole kind of progressive view of politics. But they would vote Liberal because they saw the Liberals as being the wee guy, up against the system. So even though the party was opposite to everything they believed in, they would vote for it out of this vague sentiment that it was a protest vote, that it was a vote for the wee guy. And that's exactly the sort of thing I was seeing at that local by-election. SNP, a Better Britain Unionist Party won, SNP 2, vice versa, and all that kind of stuff. So, all that kind of stuff is fed into the understanding of what we're doing with Abolish, and it's very much about, there'll be like a unionist core there, but we're also reaching out beyond that. I think that's our strength. We've got that flexibility of, we've got unionist votes, but we've also got these just like anti-politician protest votes. And I think that could be our real strength at this election.
Okay. Right, so we've got about like 3 minutes left on the Zoom call here. This part of the cool thing that happens on Zoom, you get 40 minutes, so sorry about that. Do you have anything else, John, that like particularly like you want covered before we finish?
I can just do a wee kind of finishing spiel, I suppose, just saying what we're offering?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Well, Abolish the Scottish Parliament Party. It does exactly what it says in the tin. We want to scrap the expensive, divisive, failed Blair-era devolution experiment. What we're doing in this election is we're giving Scots the first opportunity to vote against devolution since Blair's 97 referendum. For all Scots under the age of 40, it's their first ever opportunity to vote against devolution. The Scottish Parliament, it now costs well over 100 million to run every single year. That's millions spent on your lavish salaries, exorbitant expenses, and vanity projects, when ordinary Scots are suffering with job losses, cuts to public services, and SNP tax hikes. So what we are saying is we want to scrap Holyrood. We want to save 100 million every year, spend it on the NHS and education instead, and get away from this kind of Blair-era concept that the UK is nothing more than a loose collection of 4 largely self-governing nations. We want to make the case that the UK is a unitary state. The politics of devolution and referenda that have taken over the last decade or so are completely unsustainable. They're not tenable from a unionist perspective, and it's very important that we finally have an anti-devolution voice in Scottish politics. We know the support to make gains at this election is there. We only, with as the panel-based poll referred to, showed 22% support for abolition. We only need 5 to 6% to win an MSP in every region and be able to provide a vital and much needed anti-devolution voice in Scottish politics. So vote Abolish if you want to end the Holyrood gravy train and help us win much needed regional list seats off the Greens.
There you go. Well, John, thank you for joining us. It's been heavily appreciated.
No, thanks for having me. It's been really good to speak to you, and thanks for giving me the coverage.